of the rules. They try to work around, they try to leapfrog the whales and try to get ahead. No, I didn't approach, the whales came to me. Or they'll try to jump in on the dolphins, but I didn't touch them. The dolphins can always swim away. And again, this comes back to the agencies. You continue to do more outreach, you continue to be a visible presence, but sometimes new regulations have to be created to address the way that people try to get around the laws. Distant MPAs, there's different advantages and different disadvantages. They're far away, that helps. People can't get to them a lot. Northwest Hawaiian Islands, Mariana's Trench, they're far. A lot of people can't get to them. So that helps law enforcement. At the same time, it hurts us in a way that it's hard to get out to them. You can see disadvantages, ability to respond, few witnesses, costly surveillance systems. I'm going to touch on those a little bit more. So, when you're dealing with the distant marine protected areas, due to the remoteness, vessel size becomes important. You're going to have bigger boats. Our nice, safe boat, no way are we going to be able to go off Northwest Hawaiian Islands. So, size will matter. So don't try small and become lunch meat. So these are more the sizes that matter for distant marine protected area enforcement. For NOAA OLE, we have a very close relationship with the United States Coast Guard. We work very much with them. We go out on patrols on their cutters. We go out on patrols on their long-range aircraft. And this is how, we're fortunate here, in the United States, and we have these types of assets. Some countries don't have as much of these types of assets. But this really, when you have distant marine protected areas, you need these types of assets. Witnesses, you're not going to have many people on rafts. You're not going to have many witnesses up in the distant marine protected areas. But sometimes you will have witnesses. Okay, so your witnesses can be research vessels. NOAA has a number of white-hulled research vessels. They go into distant marine protected areas, Northwest Hawaiian Islands, other places in the Pacific. And I've actually talked to captains of the NOAA Corps of the boats. I've talked to the NOAA officers, and I've given them little sheets of key points that we'd be interested in if they see a violation. They won't go out of their way a lot of times to look for violations. That's not their job. But if it happens there, they see it, they're happy to document it. Fishing boats also can be witnesses. Expensive surveillance systems. These are some of the key technologies that law enforcement are going to rely on to be able to do enforcement in distant marine protected areas. You're going to have your systems, your night vision or your distant video photographing systems mounted on boats, on aircraft, UAVs. UAVs are going to probably be more of the future because the Coast Guard C-130s are very expensive to be able to fly out, missions. So these are just some of the challenges for distant marine protected area enforcement is because of the nature of them, they're far away, they become historical cases. A lot of times they're historical. Means you're not able to be there right when it happens. So boardings, a lot of times you're going to get your information from doing boardings after the fact. Okay, and that's where you're going to try to make your case. So basically, you're going to be getting information from evidentiary sources you're going to find on the boats. And if you're dealing with the distant MPAs, you're going to be going at their plotters, you're going to be looking at their logbooks, you're going to be looking at documentation on the boat, you're going to have the officers are going to open up their fishing holes and into their coolers, and you're going to look at their catch. So basically, these are just some of the things that to make a historical case, and interviews. You're going to basically have to interview people and to try to pull the case together and the evidence. And you're usually going to want to do your interviews immediately upon the first law enforcement boarding the contact of that boat. Because otherwise you're going to give the people, the violators, the perfect opportunity to concoct stories and come up with excuses and get, you're not going to be able to get different statements from different people and catch them in lies. So basically, these are some of the challenges with the distant MPA enforcement, and you're going to have language issues. A lot of times, you're going to have foreign fishing vessels or people from different ethnicities that are going to, be on those boats. The captains might be from Taiwan or something else, or People's Republic of China, or it could be the Philippines. So basically, when you're working cases on distant marine protected areas, law enforcement officers are going to have to proactively think ahead of time who they might be coming in contact with. And you might have to have translating services lined up. We've done that before. Actually, ahead of time, before we've gone and done stuff. We've had the phone numbers, we've talked to translators, we've had them on standby, we've had their numbers, and we've had personnel, we've been out there far, far away and talking to violators, and we pull out our phones, call up the translator, and then we're using a translator, handing the phone back and forth to get the job done. It's just some of the planning things. So, but basically, historical investigations is what you're going to be dealing with a lot of times for distant marine protected area enforcement. And plotters. Plotters are very important. That's key evidence, when you have closed areas, or if you're talking about your exclusive economic zones, marine protected areas, they have a wealth of information of violations, and the evidence can be lost very quickly. That's why when boarding teams are going to board a craft, they're usually going to tell people back away from the electronics, just like they would in a search warrant in a room. And you're going to want to seize the evidence from plotters. It might involve taking the plotters, or at least photographing the plotters so you can preserve the evidence. So basically, this is just some of the costs if basically enforcement in marine protected areas is not done. Worst is you're going to have a total collapse of that marine protected area. You're going to have the species go extinct. The marine protected area fails. Other types of costs if enforcement is not adequately done is deterioration of compliance. You may have started with no compliance. You did a lot of enforcement. Your compliance rate goes up. If you stop, if there's no continued presence, it will reverse slightly over time, and then you'll be back at the beginning. So you got to keep doing visible deterrence. Even if you don't have violations, you still got to be out there. And then increased scrutiny from a lot of people. If a marine protected area fails, species go extinct, there's going to be a lot of questions, a lot of scrutiny. No one likes that. So, anyways, basically it's important that enforcement is done, but when enforcement is done, you got to make sure, that when rules are being made to restrict people's access, enforcement being done, it has to be done in a balanced approach with legitimate, sustainable use. So legitimate, sustainable use is important. It's going to help you get more consensus from the community and support. So that's kind of the presentation here on enforcement in marine protected areas. Any questions? I also have one more topic I'm going to go on for a couple minutes. I've been asked to talk a little about our joint enforcement agreements that NOAA has. But any questions on this?
Thanks so much. So you talked about enforceability of rules, which I think is obviously a huge issue. But I'm wondering what you think about the balance between a rule being enforceable and the rule targeting the real issue. So for example, there's people who are opposed to scuba spear, but then you find out really the concern is scuba spear at night, or maybe you drill down even further and you find the concern is take of uhu, and that it's really too many uhu are being taken. But if you go backwards, the easiest way to address that issue might be, and to address it in a way that's enforceable, might be banning all scuba spear, because then that's the easiest way to enforce it. But the real issue may be just this one species, too much is being taken, but that's harder to enforce. And so how do you have thoughts on sort of how you find that balance between a rule that's enforceable versus a rule that really targets the issue at hand?
Right. It's going to come back to how much the community, how much the public really want to protect a certain species. How far does the government want to go in restricting access? It's going to be a balance. Because sometimes if you just wanted to restrict on that one species that people target at night, it could be impossible for law enforcement maybe to deal with that. So, it comes down to enforcement. If you want it to be done, it may have to be a broader net. And if people don't want to sacrifice some of that freedom that broader net may take away, then you may not be able to enforce in that area. So it would have to be taken on a case-by-case basis, probably.
One other question back here. It's fine.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that informative presentation. I was wondering, when you're conducting work in state waters, are you experiencing challenges with state enforcement as well? And if you're not, what are you doing to avoid those overlap challenges of jurisdiction?
Generally, we don't have problems with our state partners in different jurisdictions. We work very closely in all the places we operate with the state officers. Actually, this will lead into talking to JEA. A lot of times we'll have our state officers with us. A lot of places our state officers actually have federal authority through our joint enforcement agreements, and we work with them. Generally, though, if there is an issue that has, let's say, it's a violation of state and federal laws, it's oftentimes the violation will be documented. An investigation will be done. The officers work together. Then later on, it would usually be decided between the agencies what's the best avenue to take. Is it better to take something with a federal prosecution, or would it be better to go with a state prosecution?
This goes to your part of the earlier presentation with prosecutors' reluctance to prosecute on the basis that fines might not be enough of there's no real gain for their efforts, I guess is the notion. On Maui, and I assume this is true in the rest of the outer islands, when there are fines that are assessed by the courts on Maui, those fines go to Oahu. And so there is no incentive at all for, to enforce speeding on land, for instance, even. There's no payback. And I'm wondering if you had any notion of how that could be addressed.
I would probably want to defer that to maybe a docare, maybe Jason, to be able to answer that question, because really we wouldn't be dealing with that local level of issue if you're talking about county prosecutors. Right. So,
just to answer that question real quick, that is true. A lot of the fines that come through the judiciary system, when those fines are assessed, they do revert back to the state general fund. And this is one of the reasons and one of the arguments as to why the state DLNR has decided to go with a civil penalty system, because the fines that are assessed within a civil system stay with the department. And so we can use that within the department to advance our programs, rather than it reverting to the general state fund, which then goes into possibly the coffers of other departments.
Well, just going to pause on the questions. We'll have more time for, question and answer in the small group session. You want to just take a couple minutes, just breeze through the JEA stuff?
Right.
We got to jump into Jason's presentation.
So the Joint Enforcement Agreement, some of you might have heard about that. NOAA, Office of Law Enforcement, we have what's called the JEA's Joint Enforcement Agreements. Those are agreements between NOAA and the enforcement agencies of numerous states, territories, and commonwealths. The program is open to states, territories, commonwealths of the United States. And generally, it's for each state or territory or commonwealth, it's one agency that we would have a relationship with. Currently, it's almost every state that has an ocean boundary that we have a relationship with. Now, we have a joint enforcement agreement. The program's been operating for well over 10 years. What it is basically after legal documents are signed, it's an agreement between the state, the Commonwealth territory, and the federal government that the office, once the agreements are done, then the officers of the state agencies receive a deputization for authority to carry out certain federal laws. And so basically state officers then can in essence put on a federal hat. They can be out there doing their state job, they can be enforcing state, territory, commonwealth law, and then if they see something that they know is a federal violation, and they often know because we give them training into the federal laws, then they could actually put on the federal hat, so to speak, and they could investigate that, they could write it up to be a federal investigation, a federal matter. They would then turn it over to us, or we work it jointly with them most of the times. And so, and then basically a case could ultimately wind up going for federal prosecution, or to Alexa, or to U.S. court. The program is of a benefit to NOAA Office of Law Enforcement because we don't have a large amount of manpower, so it augments the ability for carrying out more federal law. It's a benefit to a lot of states, territories, and commonwealths because it gives them funding. There's funding that comes along with the Joint Enforcement Agreement. Every year, money from Congress has been allocated for a long time for the program. They can get this money to help pay for hours for enforcement and also equipment. So we've successfully, with this program, a number of our partners have been able to buy boats, vehicles, ATVs, anything, computers, equipment, a lot of different things. And so it really helps our state partners with getting equipment and providing money even to pay for overtime activities and special enforcement activities. And it gives us more augmented manpower. So that's kind of real brief what the JEA is about. Any questions on that?
Just take one quick question, and we're going to jump to Jason.
So, are there hours that are required for the DoCare officers to just focus?
Are there hours that are required for the DoCare officers to just focus on federal enforcement, or is it as they're doing their normal job if they happen to see federal violations?
Generally, the system is set up that as they're doing, it's a multitask. It allows multitasking. It's the most efficient way. So as they're doing their normal state patrols or state jobs, they would look for federal issues also. Though there can be times when we basically put together a special operation and we go to our partners and we say, hey, we'd like to have some backup, some assistance, can you provide some officers? And they will assign officers to it, and then it's solely a federal thing straight out.